Now, you can't make the best things about Fort Collins video without making the worst things about Fort Collins, Colorado. And well, unfortunately, negativity sells. So you've got the video you've asked for. Now we're gonna do the same format as we did with the best things. 5 common things that people talk about that they really don't like about Fort Collins in northern Colorado. And also 5 maybe under-discussed topics that, for me being a born and raised citizen of Fort Collins, are frustrating, as well as conversations with other people who have moved to the area that they don't really like. Now, my name is Patrick Soukup, and this is the Living in Fort Collins YouTube channel, where you come to learn everything there is to know about Fort Collins, Colorado, and northern Colorado. Living, sleeping, eating, working, and the worst things about Fort Collins. Now, if you're considering moving to the area, relocating, buying, selling, or investing in real estate, give my team and I a call, text, or email. We are licensed real estate agents in the state of Colorado and have helped hundreds of families relocate to the area. Now, if you are watching this video on TV, which over 45% of our viewers are, you can click the QR code right here, and what that will do, it'll take you to a scheduling page, and you can get on a Zoom call, intro call, which is a great way for us to start that process. Now, we also have a weekly newsletter as to talking about all things Fort Collins in northern Colorado, so if you're interested in signing up for that, send me your email address. It talks about things that are happening, stats, figures, facts, summary of the week's happenings, city council meetings, and our podcast as well. But without any further delay, let's jump into today's video, the worst things about Fort Collins, Colorado. Let's go. Now, I've actually done a few videos about this and actually have had some people comment back some pretty nasty comments, and honestly, the reality is the lack of diversity in Fort Collins. You know, it is common referred to as Vanilla Valley. We have nearly 90% of our citizens of Fort Collins are white. You know, it's in the high 80%, but I will say that going and seeing my kids in their school and the diversity that I see is far greater than when I was growing up here. But there are other things to consider, like my wife. She's black and we have half black kids. And one of the things that she isn't super excited about in living in Fort Collins is the exposure to other black culture and beauty of women and understanding texture of hair and culture. That will be something that our kids have a relatively decent lack of, which hopefully we can somehow contribute to getting involved with Janae's family more. Her brother is just down in Denver, but it is something that is in Fort Collins. The majority of our different races are going to be congregated mostly around the campus, but I will say more and more people of different backgrounds, mixed races, are moving to the area, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a cultural melting pot, and I think ultimately everyone is, it's all about love, baby. Number 2, and I think this is something to consider if you are moving to Fort Collins in northern Colorado, is the lack of job opportunities. What is your skill set? I've got a few different friends who, one, have intentionally moved here, but understand that if shit hit the fan, for lack of a better word, they might have to move back to their location that had their specialized job, or potentially down to Denver because, well, maybe there isn't the specialty for that industry or job. And additionally, maybe there is just not the number of opportunities in Fort Collins for your skill set. Maybe there are the opportunities, just not in huge numbers. So I would say it's something to consider, is the lack of high paying job opportunities, to where if you come to the area, are working remote, or have a specialized industry, you definitely need to do your research and make sure that there are kind of like plan B's and C's just in case. Number 3, Fort Collins ranks as one of the best places to live in a lot of different rankings over the years, prior years. In 2000, it was number 1. But with that has come kind of an increase in demand in the area, which, with a lack of supply of housing, has really pumped our housing prices. And that's something that people really need to look at when they're moving here is, well, what is the cost of housing? if they're moving from a place like Indiana or Kansas or Nebraska, it's gonna seem pretty expensive. Now, if you're coming from parts of California, Boston, New York, Seattle, parts of Florida, Texas, there might be a actual savings when you move to the area. But it's kind of an all-encompassing thing, and what I would recommend is not just looking at housing costs. We produced a cost of living in Fort Collins video that I think you should definitely watch, but that ultimately discusses property taxes, insurance, state income tax, city sales tax, and really look at it all encompassing because one thing that I do know is that cost comes in one way or another. While we might have high housing costs, our property taxes really aren't too bad, as well as our insurance rates aren't too bad. They have increased quite a bit over the last few years, but our property taxes comparatively to the Midwest or parts of Texas is a huge savings. And additionally, our insurance comparatively to kind of the Rust Belt, Tornado Belt, as well as parts of Florida and California is a good savings. So make sure to look at it all in totality. But one frustration, especially from people local here who have been born and raised, maybe are a firefighter, police officer, a coach at a high school, the cost of housing is a different level than our income for sure. You've got to be making a good income to afford living here in Fort Collins, especially if you're wanting to buy a house. Number 4, wind and hail. Well, I would say wind just ruins anything. You could have a beautifully sunny day, 80 degrees, and in the spring, it could just blow you away and it just kind of ruins the day. And I think everyone can agree that wind is just no fun. We're gonna get some decent wind in spring and parts of winter. Summer and fall are gonna be pretty chill, pretty relaxed. You'll get some windy days, but nothing too crazy. But in the spring and during parts of the winter, the wind is pretty horrendous at times. That also brings along with it hail. And we actually even have a semi-pro soccer team, the Northern Colorado Hailstorm. And it's not a fun thing when you have a property or a vehicle and there is a pretty significant hailstorm. Now, a lot of roofs are being replaced with impact-resistant shingles, so you can actually get a savings on your insurance because it should be able to withstand certain sized hail. But every once in a while, especially if you're east of I-25 and as you get out to the plains, there can be some pretty dramatic hailstorms. Once you're west of I-25, you do get a little bit of a buffer with the foothills, but that's not to say you won't get grape-sized, golf ball-sized hail once every 4, 5, 10 years. When I bought my house, I was relatively naive and I thought I was getting a great deal. That the roof came back. The house was built in 2000. We bought in 2016, so it was a 16-year-old roof. And I was like, you know what? We're getting a great deal. Let's not worry about the roof and hope that we get a hailstorm. Well, fast forward 3 years later, in 2019, we got a significant hailstorm. We repainted our house and got a new roof. And I feel like I should have been a little bit more aggressive with that roof because they can get expensive. So that being said, you do have insurance to protect you. It's just an annoyance and a pain in the butt if you are gonna have to go through a hailstorm claim. One pro tip, if you are living here or moving here, and we talk to all of our clients who are buying a house, is make sure you look at your insurance. You're always gonna balance premiums versus deductibles, but specifically on wind and hail, you're gonna wanna look at, is it a flat deductible or a percentage deductible? That could be really impactful if there is in fact a time that you do need to make a claim. In fact, I had a friend of mine that didn't realize that he had a percentage deductible versus a flat deductible. And he was asking me if I could look at this insurance policy. We didn't help him on the purchase of the house. This was, a decade ago, but they ended up getting a hailstorm in the Greeley area. And he thought he was gonna have a $2,500 deductible, but ended up being about $8,500, like 2% of property value deductible. And that essentially was half or more of what the cost to replace the roof was. So wind and hail are a pain in the butt. There are ways to make sure you're protected, but make sure that in that scenario, you have a discussion with yourself, your spouse, your partner, your whoever, your advisor. Should I do lower premium, higher deductible, or lower deductible, higher premium? Where am I comfortable? Number 5, and this one can be a conversation for people, the trains. How close do you have to be, or how far away from the trains do you have to be, and how often do they come through here? Like, there's a train over off of Timberline that goes right behind my aunt's house, and we've got clients. It's over by Linden Park, which is also by the reserve at Timberline and Willow Springs and Oak Ridge Village, and other neighborhoods kind of back up to this railroad, but it actually only goes 3 times a day, and at the intersections, it does sound, but there are kind of quiet times in the evenings and things of that nature for that railroad. But then you go over to the kind of the Mason Road, and there could be a train going down at 3 a.m. that's sounding the horn, and if you're living in the Penny Flats, you could be in hell if you don't like that. So we've got, essentially 3 different areas of town, Mason, Timberline, and along Vine, that are gonna be train issues. And if that is an annoyance or a concern of yours, you're gonna wanna give yourself a buffer. I will say my entire life, I've lived east of Mason Road, and I've never really had to deal with getting stuck going east and west on Mason, except if I'm going over to Spring Canyon Park or something along those lines. But heading south and north, if you live on the north side of town, Country Club, or now there is a big overpass, which has been a game changer, but let's just say Terry Lake area or LaPorte, and you're coming south to Old Town or South Fort Collins, especially in the early mornings or different times of the day, you can get stuck at that railroad, and it is an annoyance. So number 5 of a common hatred or worst thing about Fort Collins is the trains. Now, our next is kind of under-discussed and the reality or lack of certain things here in Fort Collins. And number 1 in that is lack of shopping options in Fort Collins. Now, we have a wonderful downtown, Old Town Fort Collins. It's the heart, it's the gem, and there are some really cool boutique shops, shopping opportunities, little knickknacks, pastries, ice cream, and it's a great time to walk around, park your car, and enjoy what is Old Town Fort Collins. But outside of that, you've got the Front Range Village that is starting to come, up in the world as far as specifically restaurant opportunities and coffee shops, but not amazing shopping per se. And one thing that hopefully happens in the near future is the Foothills Mall comes back to life. It was developed a few years back for $350 million by Alberta Development, and it was an absolute flop. Now it's beautiful, but it's your old traditional indoor mall. The McQuinneys bought it for pennies on the dollar for about $48 million from foreclosure, and still own it and have great plans to renovate this area and turn it into something special. It's right in the heart of Fort Collins, but there are something, like we're gonna talk about here shortly, that are causing pause. Cost of development, timeline development, water cost. So we will see what ends up happening there. But if you want or enjoy shopping, you're probably gonna go down to Centerra or even go down to the Flatirons Mall down in Denver or Boulder and shop there, because there's just not a ton of shopping opportunities in Fort Collins. Number 2, and I'm dealing with this just now, it is the lack of vendors or skilled professionals or tradespeople. Fort Collins is a growing community. I actually believe there's a phenomenal opportunity if you're entrepreneurial and want to start a business. You can absolutely be successful here in Northern Colorado because the demand is here. You're not just working in Fort Collins. I've said this many, many times. While you might live in Fort Collins, you're living in Northern Colorado. So your operations could be a 60-mile radius, which is talking about 1 million plus people when you look at Weld County, Larimer County, all the way down to North Denver. You have an opportunity to be extremely successful here in Fort Collins, Northern Colorado, because there's the demand. I recently tore my calf and called into the OCR without going to the ER or urgent care, and they said, the earliest we can get you in is, and basically 75 days, about 2.5 months. And it was extremely frustrating. So unfortunately, I kind of hurt myself a little bit worse, did have to go into urgent care, got a referral, and it did cut it down to about 30 days. So there is some savings there in the sense of if you get a referral, if you know somebody, but additionally, on the contractor side of things, That's some comment that a few of my friends have made, specifically people who have moved from Texas, where they say, man, we've got skilled labor and tradespeople all over the place. But that's not the case in Fort Collins. In fact, I've talked with my family a time or two, and I'm like, hey, listen, these electricians, plumbers, HVAC, general contractors, we need to take care of them very well. There's not a ton of them. And if they're reliable, you hold on to them like gold. So unfortunately, in Fort Collins, the lack of tradespeople, skilled professionals, tax accountants, even tax accountants, you can get in there or have an attorney appointment months down the road just because there's not a ton of them. So the silver lining is if you're entrepreneurial or a skilled professional, you have an opportunity to be extremely successful here in Northern Colorado. If you're a citizen or somebody who needs those tradespeople, make sure you team up with somebody. We'd be happy to connect you with some of our vendors, tradespeople, referred partners, and get you in the door and kind of make a referral for you. But that being said, definite frustration there. Number 3, the downtown scene between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. Actually, our mayor, Jenny Arent, said this on a recent city council session that she said, it's kind of embarrassing. It's sad. It's an embarrassment because when you go down in Old Town at 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., Thursday, Friday night, or Saturday night, it is a college town. And you could have people that are drinking and excessively drinking. You could see puke in alleyways or people just being belligerent. And there is something to be said that is not attractive and a little bit of a frustration. But 10 p.m. is kind of when it starts. Most people go out at 9 p.m. I remember at some point in my mid to late 20s, I was single, and we would start our nights at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, which is just wild. So if you're a young professional, retired couple, young family, or single individuals that's spending your time downtown, you're going to want to basically draw the line about 9:30, 9:45 and get out of there before the riffraff of drunk college kids make their way there. But it really is going to be limited to about Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. So the rest of the weekdays are going to be pretty laid back, pretty chill, nothing too crazy going on downtown. But number 3, downtown Fort Collins between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. Number 4, and this might be what causes the development from the McQuinney's at the Foothills Mall to be paused, which is the development process, the timeline, and the cost of water. In fact, when they first bought it and we interviewed the McQuinney's on our podcast, we were having a conversation where they were considering moving our price of a water share from $68,000 to like $180,000 per share. And if you're in Fort Collins and you're wanting to build residential units, well, your water cost just went up 3 times. Now, what ended up actually happening is they actually decreased it from $68,000 to $64,000 per share. They had some math behind it, all that good stuff, but it's still relatively expensive. So when there was a large component of residential in this redevelopment of the mall, water was a conversation. And additionally, the development and redevelopment process is extensive. And it's a conversation at City Council that they continue to have of how can we make this go faster? Even a change of use for a business from, let's just say, a single family to an office can be pretty burdensome. And in fact, for some people who are changing maybe from a coffee shop to a restaurant, the price of a water, price of redevelopment, all of that kind of stuff really needs to be looked at and is being looked at from the City of Fort Collins City Council, because they're saying, hey, listen, we can't have this development take 3 years. In fact, I was just having lunch with a good buddy, very successful entrepreneur, and we were talking about the one part of real estate that I would never touch is development. Developers get a little bit of a bad reputation because they make so much money on the houses. And I'm like, they need to. The risk that they are taking from this idea and concept, conversation that they're having with this landowner, farmer, and then taking it from there through the entitlement process and going through the development review process to actually putting a shovel in the dirt and houses going vertical could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years long, and the economies could absolutely shift. So they could start in a very, very up economy, and by the time they're selling houses are in a down economy and are losing their shorts. So when they make a lot of money, I'm all for it. But it's one part of real estate that I've always told myself I would never touch. But that's a big frustration for builders, developers, is the timeline for development and the cost of water, and really all of Colorado, not just Fort Collins, not northern Colorado, but all of Colorado. Colorado is a scarce water is a scarce resource, and Thornton, Denver, Fort Collins, northern Colorado, the Western Slope, everywhere is having the conversation of how do we protect this resource. Number 5, now this is kind of something that I personally get a little bit of frustration through, and that is the lack of a big city energy. If you're gonna go out to lunch on a Wednesday afternoon downtown Fort Collins around 12 or 1 o'clock, there's a high likelihood that there's just not a ton of people in that establishment. And in fact, there was a restaurant called The Kitchen. My wife and I went on a Wednesday afternoon, and we were the only people in this entire restaurant. And I'm looking around, I'm like, this is the prime time where people should be having lunch with clients or other individuals, but there was just nobody there. It was wild. So Fort Collins doesn't really have that big city energy. It's gonna be a sleepy town after about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, pretty much 3 to 4 days a week, not including Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night like we talked about earlier. But overall, it's a very laid back vibe. So a lot of people who are actually moving here to kind of get rid of or away from that big city energy. But every once in a while, if you get that itch, luckily, Denver's just an hour down the road. So you can go get, professional sports or big plays or musicals or concerts. They're all just an hour away, but Fort Collins is definitely a laid-back town that can be frustrating at times if you're wanting to go out and do something on a Tuesday night and there's just nothing to do or everything's shut down. So it's something to take into consideration. Now, those are 5 common things that aren't necessarily loved about Fort Collins, and 5 under-discussed items as well. Now, let's talk about some honorable mentions, and we're really just gonna run through here. And if you have any specific questions about them, feel free to ask, reach out, and I'd be happy to share my thoughts on those. But let's go. Number 1, limited late night options. We are really just talking about this. It's a laid back community, not a lot of big city energy. Number 2, air quality concerns. Apparently, Larimer County doesn't have the best air quality. Now, being born and raised here, I haven't really noticed it. But that being said, there's an air quality measure management tool on your weather app. And when I first was discussing this and scripting this video, it was 35 and good air quality. But there are readings and discussions about how Larimer County ranks very poorly in air quality. So something to at least take into consideration. Public transportation is definitely a frustration. I did a full video on this. We don't have a great system, but we do have a public transportation system, and it is trying to do better. One thing we absolutely have a phenomenal system is our bike infrastructure, and it's only gonna get better. So hopefully between all of these different things of public transportation, bike infrastructure, road, buses, all these different things, our public transportation and traffic congestion, all that good stuff gets better over time with an intentionality behind it. Speaking of which, traffic and congestion, I think there's 2 parties here. People who are born and raised here in Fort Collins are coming from a small community, say traffic sucks, it's terrible. And then you got people who are coming and living here from Houston, Los Angeles, parts of Boston, New York, and they're like, there's 0 traffic here. So it's definitely a perspective deal, but I would say overall, probably the litmus test for me is generally, you're going to be at a stoplight one time, get through it, and move on with your life. You're not going to be stuck at that stoplight 2, 3, 4 times unless there is congestion due to road traffic or roads being shut down, or every once in a while, maybe rush hour, you might have to go through 2 different stoplights, but very rarely. Limited housing variety, and I think this actually has contributed to the affordability that we talked about earlier, is the majority of houses for purchase are going to be single family detached homes. There are going to be some townhome options and some condo options, but Colorado had a construction defects law that that fortunately we have overcome, but for a long time, condos weren't being built because of the fear of being sued from a property owner 7, 10, 15, or forever years down the road. And so the insurance policies that they had to carry on these properties just didn't really pencil out. So because of that, and also because of our history, really being a smaller community, most of the homes built here are single family. So the lack of housing variety really limits you as far as an entry-level house if you're wanting to buy a townhome or condo. It's not to say there's none, it's just to say the majority of our houses are gonna be single family detached, or the attached product is gonna be for rent. And finally, we actually just had this issue. It's restaurant capacity and making reservations. Growing up here, that never happened. You just kind of went to the restaurant and got right in. Maybe every once in a while you needed to make a reservation, but generally speaking, now if you're going out Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night to grab a dinner, you're gonna need to make a reservation. And on the holidays, you're gonna need to make a reservation, probably a week and a half to 2 weeks plus in advance if you're wanting to secure a spot. So that's a little bit of a change to Fort Collins. It kind of corresponds with our lack of vendors, tradespeople, restaurant opportunities, shopping. There's just a limited supply, and with the growth of Fort Collins, Northern Colorado, Timnath, Wellington, Severance, all these areas that make their way into Fort Collins for these amenities, it has added pressures to reservations and dinner and restaurant capacity. I do say that, and knowing earlier I said that restaurants on a Wednesday at noon are vacant, and that is very much the case. But good restaurants, good operations on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night, you're gonna need to make a reservation, and holidays absolutely need to make a reservation. So there you have it, folks, the worst things about Fort Collins, Colorado. If you have something that I missed or maybe didn't hit on enough, leave it in the comments below and I'd make sure to get back to it. Until next time, take care.